one room. One bed, the Billionaire CEO said. Her wedding planner was packing before dawn. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's emotional story about two women whose lives are about to collide in a way neither of them could have imagined, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story from our channel. It only takes a moment, it is completely free, and it helps us continue bringing you heartfelt, dramatic, and unforgettable stories about courage, second chances, healing, and love between women. Your support truly means the world to us. And before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? Share your city or country in the comments below. Thank you so much for being here. Now, let us return to our main character and the unexpected night when one room, one bed, and one impossible choice began to change everything. If you can buy anything in the world, what happens when the one thing you want refuses to have a price? I didn't know it then, but that question would come to define Claire Whitmore, the woman whose wedding I had been hired to make perfect. My name is Hannah Brooks, and at 32, I had planned enough weddings to know that money could purchase white roses flown in from California, handmade invitations, crystal chandeliers, and champagne that cost more than my first car. What money couldn't buy was the look people gave each other when they genuinely wanted to spend their lives together. Claire had everything except that look. The first time I met her, she was standing inside the grand ballroom of Whitmore Ridge Resort, 40 miles outside Denver, studying a room that would soon hold 300 guests. At 43, Claire was the billionaire founder and CEO of Whitmore Hospitality, and she carried herself like someone accustomed to making decisions before everyone else had finished identifying the problem. Her tailored navy suit was immaculate, her expression composed, and 3 assistants followed behind her with tablets in their hands. "The flowers are wrong," she said. I glanced toward the sample arrangement. "Those are the white garden roses you approved yesterday." I changed my mind. One assistant immediately started typing. "And the lighting?" Claire asked. "Warmer," I said. "It will make the ballroom feel less corporate." Her gray eyes settled on me. "Corporate is bad? For a board meeting?" "No." "For a wedding?" "Usually." Nobody spoke. One assistant looked as though I had just insulted the Federal Reserve. Claire, however, almost smiled. Almost. We spent the next hour walking through details that seemed designed to impress everyone except the 2 people getting married. A 12-piece orchestra. Imported linens. A 6-tier cake. Custom silver place cards. Every decision was flawless, expensive, and strangely empty. Finally, Claire stopped beside a wall of windows overlooking snow-covered mountains. "What do you think?" she asked. "Professionally? Is there another answer?" I hesitated. Clients paid me to solve problems, not create them. Still, something about Claire made dishonesty feel worse than unemployment. "I think you're planning an extraordinary event." Her gaze sharpened. That wasn't the question. I took a breath. A wedding can be expensive and still be empty. Behind us, someone shifted uncomfortably. Claire remained perfectly still. Then she dismissed her assistants with a quiet instruction. When we were alone, she looked toward the mountains. "You always speak to clients this way?" "Only when they ask what I think." "That must be terrible for business." Surprisingly, honesty gets referrals. This time she did smile, but it disappeared almost immediately. Her phone rang. "Excuse me." I walked toward the ballroom entrance, giving her privacy, until her voice stopped me. "No, Richard. The wedding has to happen." Something in her tone had changed. The confidence was gone, replaced by exhaustion. I should have kept walking. Instead, I froze. "I understand what's at stake," Claire continued quietly. "The board has made that perfectly clear." A pause followed. Then came the sentence I would remember long after everything else about that afternoon faded. "The wedding has to happen. Love has nothing to do with it." I slipped out before she could realize I had hurt her, but as the ballroom doors closed behind me, I looked down at the wedding schedule in my hands and felt something shift inside my understanding of Claire Whitmore. Until that moment, I had assumed the billionaire CEO was building the wedding she wanted. For the first time, I wondered whether she was building a beautiful cage she believed she had no choice but to enter. The storm arrived 2 days before the wedding, and by 6 that evening, the mountains had disappeared behind a curtain of snow. I had been checking table assignments in the resort office when my phone began lighting up with messages from vendors. The florist was delayed. The string quartet was stranded 20 miles away. Half the guests had decided to arrive early before the roads became worse, which meant the front desk suddenly had more people than available rooms. I had handled wedding disasters before, but this one seemed determined to test every lesson I had learned in 10 years. Hannah. Claire stood in the doorway, still wearing her work clothes, although her usually perfect hair had loosened around her face. Tell me what you need. It surprised me. Most wealthy clients asked what I planned to do for them. Claire asked what she could do for me. Permission to turn the conference lounge into temporary accommodations, access to the resort vans, and authority to rearrange tomorrow morning's schedule. Done. No argument. No committee. Within minutes, her staff was helping mine carry blankets, call guests, and reorganize transportation. For the next 4 hours, Claire worked beside us. Not above us. Beside us. She carried boxes. She brought coffee to the front desk employees. She personally called an elderly couple whose flight had been diverted to make sure they had somewhere safe to stay. That was when the first crack appeared in the version of Claire I had constructed in my mind. Shortly after midnight, the last displaced guest received a room. I finally returned to the office and discovered my overnight bag sitting beside the desk. You cannot sleep here, Claire said behind me. Watch me. The heating system shuts down in this wing overnight. Then I will wear my coat. She gave me a look that suggested stubbornness was normally a language she respected. There is one available guest room. I immediately understood from her expression that there was a complication. What is wrong with it? Nothing. Claire. She exhaled. There is one bed. I stared at her. You are joking. I rarely joke after midnight. I can take the conference lounge. It is full. The lobby sofa. A family from Chicago already claimed it. I folded my arms. You own this resort. Apparently ownership does not create additional bedrooms. I laughed before I could stop myself. Claire looked startled, then laughed too, softly, as though the sound had surprised her even more. 10 minutes later, we entered a quiet corner suite overlooking the storm. The room was beautiful, but neither of us seemed interested in its luxury. You take the bed, Claire said. I will use the sofa. That sofa is 5 feet long. I am 5 feet 7. I will negotiate with it. You do not have to prove anything. Her expression changed. Neither do you. For a moment, the silence between us felt different from the silence in the ballroom. Less guarded. More human. I accepted the bed, and Claire took the sofa with an extra blanket. We turned off the lights, but sleep refused to come. Outside, wind moved softly against the windows. Hannah? Claire said eventually. Yes? What you said yesterday about an expensive wedding still being empty. I waited. How do you know when it is not empty? The question sounded nothing like something a billionaire chief executive officer would ask. It sounded like something a lonely woman would ask when nobody else was listening. When both people are choosing the same future, I said. The room became quiet again. Then Claire whispered, and what if everyone is counting on you to choose the wrong one? That was the moment I understood the storm outside was not the reason neither of us could sleep. For several seconds, I could hear nothing but the wind moving beyond the windows and the quiet hum of the heater. Claire had asked the question so softly that I wondered whether she regretted saying it aloud. Who is counting on you? I asked. She shifted beneath the blanket on the sofa. More people than I can afford to disappoint. I sat against the headboard, suddenly wide awake. That sounds like something a chief executive officer would say. That is because being a chief executive officer stopped being my job years ago. Somewhere along the way, it became my identity. Her voice carried none of the authority I heard in meetings. My father believed every decision had a price and every relationship had a purpose. He used to tell me that sentiment was expensive. My parents would have hated that philosophy. What were they like? The question caught me off guard. Ordinary, I said, smiling into the darkness. My father taught high school history. My mother managed a neighborhood bakery. They never had much money, but every Friday night they made dinner together. Even when they were tired. Even when they were annoyed with each other. Claire was quiet. Were they happy? Not every day. That was what made it real. They chose each other even on the boring days. I heard her breathe out slowly. That sounds luxurious. The word stayed with me. This woman owned hotels where people paid thousands of dollars for a weekend, yet she spoke about an ordinary marriage as though I had described a private island. Claire, why are you getting married? Another silence. Longer this time. My company is negotiating a merger with Halston Capital. Daniel's family controls the voting bloc we need. The agreement protects several properties that are struggling and keeps thousands of employees from facing uncertainty. And marrying Daniel is part of that agreement? Not officially. But everyone understands. Exactly. I looked toward the faint outline of the sofa. Does Daniel love you? Daniel understands me. That was not what I asked. A small, humorless laugh escaped her. You really do insist on honesty. Occupational hazard. No, she said. I do not think he loves me. And I do not love him. The answer should not have surprised me, but hearing it made my chest tighten with sadness rather than judgment. Then why sacrifice your life for a business deal? Because those employees have mortgages. Children. College tuition. Medical bills. I can survive an unhappy marriage. Surviving is a very low standard for a life. Claire did not answer. Minutes passed. Then she said, when I was 9, my father canceled my birthday dinner because an investor called. He told me I would understand when I grew up. Her voice softened. I did understand. That may be the problem. Something inside me shifted. Claire was not cold because she felt nothing. She had simply learned to translate every feeling into responsibility. My mother used to say love is the only thing that becomes more valuable when you give it away, I told her. Your mother sounds wiser than my father. She also burned every Thanksgiving turkey until I was 16. Claire laughed, and this time the sound was warm and unguarded. I smiled in the darkness. There. That is better. What is? You sounded like a person instead of a quarterly earnings report. Do not tell my board. Your secret is safe. The storm continued outside, but the room no longer felt uncomfortable. Eventually Claire grew quiet. I thought she had fallen asleep until she spoke once more. Hannah? Yes? Do you think people can learn to choose differently after spending their whole lives choosing duty? I considered the question carefully. I think the first choice is admitting you want something different. She said nothing after that. By morning, I would tell myself our conversation had simply been two exhausted women talking through a sleepless night. But somewhere before I closed my eyes, I realized I was no longer wondering why Claire Whitmore was marrying the wrong person. I was wondering who she might become if, for once in her life, she allowed herself to choose freely. Morning arrived quietly, turning the snow beyond the windows pale gold, and for one confused second I forgot where I was. Then I saw Claire asleep on the sofa, one arm tucked beneath the pillow, and remembered everything we had said in the darkness. I slipped out of bed carefully and reached for my shoes, only to discover the loose strap I had complained about the previous evening was neatly repaired. You fixed this? I asked when Claire stirred. She opened her eyes and looked almost embarrassed. You were asleep. There was a sewing kit in the bathroom. Billionaire hotel executive, amateur shoe repair specialist. Diversification is important. I laughed, and something about the ordinary sound of it made the room feel unexpectedly comfortable. 20 minutes later, another surprise waited downstairs. Claire handed me a paper cup. Oat milk latte, 1 extra shot, no sugar. I stared at her. How did you know? You ordered it yesterday. You remembered my coffee? She shrugged, but I noticed the faint smile she tried to hide. I remember details. That answer followed me throughout the morning. The roads remained closed, but the wedding preparations continued. We moved the ceremony rehearsal indoors, reorganized vendor deliveries, and transformed weather problems into manageable inconveniences. Claire stayed close, helping without taking control. Around noon, I climbed a 6-foot ladder to adjust a strand of greenery above the ballroom entrance. That is crooked, Claire called from below. Thank you for your valuable contribution. 3 inches to the left. Would you like to come up here? Absolutely not. I shifted the greenery and glanced down. Better? Perfect. My foot caught awkwardly as I descended, and Claire instinctively steadied the ladder. Careful. Her voice was softer than necessary. When I reached the floor, we stood facing each other for a moment, both suddenly quiet. There was nothing inappropriate about it. Nothing had happened. Still, I became intensely aware of how much had changed since our first meeting. I stepped back first. We should check the reception tables. Claire nodded. Of course. The afternoon became a blur of flowers, menus, and seating charts until Daniel finally arrived shortly before sunset. He entered the ballroom talking on his phone, kissed Claire briefly on the cheek without interrupting his conversation, and immediately asked whether the board documents had been delivered. I pretended to study a centerpiece. Claire glanced toward me, and I wished she had not. Because now I understood the sadness behind her eyes. Later, I found her alone near the windows overlooking the snow. Everything will be ready, I said. I know. Then why do you look worried? Claire gave me a tired smile. Because you have made it difficult to pretend I do not know the difference anymore. The difference between what? Being needed and being loved. I had no clever answer. I only stood beside her while evening settled over the mountains. After a while, Claire said, You should know something about me. I am very good at solving problems. I noticed. But I think I have spent years solving the wrong ones. She turned toward me, and for one suspended second, I thought she might say something neither of us could take back. Instead, I shook my head gently. Claire, you are still getting married. The warmth disappeared from her expression, replaced by understanding. You are right. Whatever you are feeling, you need to understand it before you involve anyone else. She looked through the glass again. That sounds inconvenient. The important truths usually are. Then she smiled, small and genuine, and I realized something that frightened me more than the complicated wedding ever could. I was beginning to care what Claire chose, and I needed to make certain that whatever happened next, the choice truly belonged to her. By late afternoon, the mountain roads had reopened, and the resort began filling with guests who had no idea how close the entire weekend had come to unraveling. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I could not stop thinking about Claire's words. Being needed and being loved. I buried myself in work until one of Claire's assistants handed me an updated reception schedule and accidentally included a document that was never meant for me. I recognized the Halston Capital name immediately. Beneath it were projections for 6 Whitmore properties, more than 2,000 employees, and a financing deadline scheduled for Monday morning. I closed the folder at once. I had no intention of reading private corporate information, but I had already seen enough to understand something important. Claire had not exaggerated. This wedding was connected to consequences reaching far beyond 2 wealthy families. You saw it. Claire's voice came from behind me. Only the first page. It was included by mistake. She took the folder but did not look angry. She looked tired. Those hotels have been struggling since we expanded too quickly 3 years ago. The merger gives us time to stabilize them. And Daniel's family controls whether the merger happens. His father controls the voting bloc that can approve it. I lowered my voice. So if you cancel the wedding? Claire looked toward the ballroom, where employees were arranging chairs beneath thousands of tiny lights. The Halstons could walk away. Financing could disappear. Properties could be sold. Jobs could be lost. Suddenly, the beautiful room felt heavier. Does your board expect you to marry him? They expect me to protect the company. That is not the same thing. To them, it is close enough. I thought about the employees I had watched Claire help during the storm. She knew their names. She remembered their families. Her sense of responsibility was real, but so was the trap hidden inside it. Claire, responsibility does not mean surrendering ownership of your life. That is easy to say when 2,000 paychecks are not sitting on the other side of your decision. I know. She studied me, perhaps expecting an argument. Then you understand why I have to do this. No. I understand why you are afraid not to. Her expression tightened. There is a difference. There is always a difference between fear and duty. Claire turned away. For a moment, I worried I had pushed too far. Then she said, "What would you do?" I could have told her to cancel everything. Some selfish part of me wanted to. But that would only replace one person making Claire's choices with another. I would stop asking what everyone wants from me long enough to decide what I can live with. And if your answer were me? The question was so quiet I almost missed it. My heart seemed to forget its rhythm for a second, but I forced myself to remain steady. Then I would tell you that is not enough. Claire turned back, surprised. Not enough? Do not cancel your wedding for me. Do not choose me because I happened to be here when you finally admitted you were unhappy. Her eyes searched mine. Hannah. If you change your life, Claire, change it because it belongs to you. Not because another woman gave you somewhere else to run. The ballroom doors opened behind us, and voices spilled into the hallway as the rehearsal began. Claire looked toward them, then back at me. You make freedom sound terrifying. Sometimes it is. And you still think it is worth it? I smiled sadly. Especially then. She walked toward the ballroom, but before entering, she stopped. Nobody has ever asked me what I wanted without also hoping to influence the answer. Then she disappeared through the doors. I remained there alone, finally understanding the hardest truth of the weekend. Caring about Claire did not give me the right to become her escape. If what was growing between us meant anything at all, I had to be willing to let her choose a future that might not include me. The rehearsal ended at 10:30 that night, but I stayed in the ballroom long after everyone else had gone, checking place cards that did not need checking and straightening chairs that were already perfectly aligned. I knew what I was doing. I was delaying the moment when I would have to decide whether staying until morning was professional dedication or something less honest. You are avoiding me. Claire's voice came from the doorway. I turned. She had changed out of her formal rehearsal clothes and stood there holding 2 cups of tea. I am working. You reorganized that table 3 times. It is an important table. Apparently. She placed 1 cup beside me. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then Claire said, I talked to Daniel. My hand stopped moving. About tomorrow? About us. About what this marriage actually is. And? He told me we both knew the arrangement when we agreed to it. Claire looked toward the empty ceremony space. He was not cruel. That almost made it harder. He believes we can build a respectable life from mutual interests and shared responsibilities. Maybe some people can. Maybe. Her eyes met mine. I do not think I can anymore. My heart lifted before good sense pulled it back down. Claire, be careful. I have been careful my entire life. She stepped closer, though enough space remained between us to make the boundary clear. I am tired of treating every feeling like a problem that needs to be managed. Then do not manage this one. Understand it. Her expression softened. I think I do. I shook my head. No. You understand that you are unhappy. That is not the same as understanding what comes next. And if I told you I know what I feel when I am around you? The room seemed suddenly too quiet. I would tell you not to make me responsible for tomorrow. Pain crossed her face, and I hated that I had put it there, but I continued. If you walk away from that ceremony, it has to be because you cannot honestly enter that marriage. Not because you think I am waiting on the other side. Claire looked down at the untouched tea. What if I want you to be? That is exactly why I cannot. I returned to my room sometime after midnight and sat on the edge of the bed with my suitcase open on the floor. Leaving felt wrong. Staying felt worse. I thought about my parents and all those Friday dinners, about the kind of love they had taught me without ever giving it a name. Love was not possession. Love was not rescue. Sometimes love was refusing to become someone else's excuse. So I packed. Before sunrise, the resort was silent. Snow reflected the first gray light as I carried my suitcase downstairs. At the front desk, I left the completed wedding binder, every vendor contact, every contingency plan, and a sealed envelope with Claire's name on it. Inside was a single page. Whatever you choose today, make sure it is finally your choice. I handed responsibility for the event to my senior coordinator, Melissa Parker, who had worked beside me for 6 years and knew every detail. Then I walked outside. The cold Colorado air filled my lungs as I loaded my suitcase into my car. I expected relief. Instead, I felt grief for something that had never truly begun. But then I remembered Claire asking whether people could learn to choose differently. Maybe they could. Maybe I could too. I started the engine and drove slowly down the mountain road as dawn appeared behind me. For the first time since meeting Claire Whitmore, I was not wondering what she would choose. I was proving that whatever her answer was, I would respect her enough to let it be hers. By the time I reached Denver, Claire was standing in front of a mirror while 3 people prepared her for a wedding she no longer recognized as her own. I learned what happened that morning much later, but whenever Claire told me the story, she always began with the note. She found my envelope beside the wedding binder at 7:15. She read my words once, then again, before sitting alone for nearly 20 minutes. At 10, the ballroom filled with guests. The orchestra began playing. Daniel waited beneath an arch of white roses while Claire stood behind closed doors with her father's old advice echoing through her memory. Protect the company. Control the outcome. Never let emotion become expensive. Then, she told me, she thought about something I had said in the storm. Surviving was a very low standard for a life. When the doors opened, Claire walked down the aisle. She did not run. She did not cry. She reached Daniel, turned toward him, and quietly asked for a moment. The music stopped. I cannot make this promise honestly, she said. Daniel stared at her, but Claire continued before fear could change her mind. You deserve someone who chooses this marriage freely. So do I. The room fell silent. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then gave a small nod. He had understood the arrangement better than anyone, and perhaps he understood its ending too. Claire apologized to the guests and took responsibility without blaming Daniel, his family, or the company. Then she walked away from the ceremony she had spent months constructing. But she did not come looking for me. That mattered. Instead, Claire changed clothes, entered a conference room with her board, and faced the consequences of her decision. Halston Capital suspended the merger discussions before noon. Several directors demanded that Claire reconsider. One warned that refinancing the struggling properties without Halston support could cost millions. Claire listened. Then she did something she had never done before. She stopped treating herself as one of the assets available for negotiation. Find another structure, she told them. Sell my private holdings if necessary. Reduce executive bonuses. Delay expansion. Protect the employees first. But my marriage is not company property. For the next 12 hours, Claire and her finance team rebuilt the plan from the ground up. She offered part of her personal equity as security, canceled 2 expansion projects, and proposed selling a luxury property that had never become profitable. None of it was easy. None of it guaranteed success. But for the first time, the sacrifice came from resources she owned rather than a future she had surrendered. Meanwhile, I sat in my apartment with my phone turned face down on the kitchen counter. Melissa had sent only one message. The ceremony did not happen. Everyone is safe. Claire is handling it. I read those words until they blurred. Every instinct told me to call her. I wanted to know whether she was all right. I wanted to hear her voice. But I remembered why I had left. If I reached for Claire now, I would never know whether she had truly chosen freedom or simply exchanged one dependency for another. So I waited. One day became a week. A week became a month. Claire never called. Neither did I. Then, almost 3 months after the wedding that never happened, I was standing inside a small community hall outside Denver, arranging wildflowers for a schoolteacher and a firefighter who had saved for 2 years to afford their wedding. Melissa approached carrying a box of candles. Someone is asking for you. Tell them I will be there in 5 minutes. Melissa smiled strangely. I think you should go now. I turned toward the entrance. Claire stood beneath the winter sunlight, alone, without assistance, without a driver waiting behind her, and without the armor I remembered. She did not move toward me immediately. She simply smiled. And in that moment, I understood why she had stayed away. Claire had not spent 3 months trying to find me. She had spent them learning how to find herself. For a moment, neither of us moved. Around me, volunteers carried flowers and folded table linens, but the room seemed to grow strangely quiet. Claire looked different. Not dramatically different, but lighter somehow. She wore a simple charcoal coat, her hair loose around her shoulders, and there was no assistant hovering nearby with a schedule. Hello, Hannah, she said. 3 months, and those 2 words were enough to bring back the mountain, the storm, and every conversation I had tried not to replay. Hello, Claire. I glanced toward the tables. I am working. I know. Melissa told me. I gave Melissa a look across the room. She suddenly became fascinated by a box of candles. Claire smiled. Could I have 5 minutes? 5. We stepped into the hallway, where winter sunlight stretched across the floor. Claire reached into her bag and handed me a thin folder. What is this? Proof that I did not come here to ask you to rescue me. Inside was a summary of Whitmore Hospitality's restructuring. I recognized enough financial language to understand the important parts. The failed merger had been replaced by new financing. Claire had sold one underperforming luxury property, postponed expansion, reduced executive compensation, and protected the jobs at the 6 hotels that had once depended on the Halston deal. You did it, I whispered. We did it. My team deserves most of the credit. And Daniel? He is doing well. Better than I expected, actually. We spoke last month. There is no anger between us. I closed the folder. Why did you wait 3 months? Claire looked directly at me. Because you were right. That answer surprised me more than any declaration could have. I spent most of my life believing that if I wanted something badly enough, I should make a plan and pursue it. But you were not a business objective. You were a person. I needed to know I could build a life I respected even if you were never part of it. My throat tightened. And can you? Yes. She smiled, and there was something peaceful in it. For the first time, yes. Then why are you here? Claire took a breath. Because now I can choose you without asking you to save me. The words landed gently, but I felt them everywhere. Still, I had one question left. What exactly are you asking for? Her smile widened. Coffee. I blinked. Coffee? 1 cup. Somewhere without a board of directors, a wedding rehearsal, or a weather emergency. If it goes badly, you can leave after 20 minutes. I laughed. You canceled a multi-million-dollar wedding and rebuilt your company, and your grand romantic plan is coffee? I have been advised to start small. By whom? My therapist. That stopped me. Claire nodded. Another decision I made for myself. I looked at the woman standing in front of me and realized this was not the Claire I had left before dawn. More importantly, she was not pretending to be someone new just to impress me. She had done the difficult work while nobody was watching. There is a coffee shop 3 blocks from here, I said. I finish at 4. Claire checked the clock on the wall. That is 4 hours and 12 minutes. Chief executive officers are supposed to be patient. Nobody has ever accused me of that. Consider it personal development. She laughed, and I felt the last of my resistance soften. At 4:15, we sat across from each other in a small neighborhood cafe while snow began falling outside. No contracts. No expectations. No promises larger than we could honestly make. Claire told me about therapy, about learning to delegate, about calling employees directly to explain the restructuring. I told her about the weddings I had planned and how strange it had felt not hearing from her. I wanted to call you every day, she admitted. Why did you not? Because for once, wanting something did not mean I was entitled to reach for it immediately. I covered her hand with mine, a small gesture that felt more meaningful than anything dramatic could have. Claire looked down at our hands, then back at me. Is this still just coffee? She asked. For today. And tomorrow? I smiled. Tomorrow gets its own choice. Outside, snow softened the Denver streets, and Claire squeezed my hand gently. Nothing had been guaranteed. That was precisely why the moment mattered. We were not 2 people trapped by circumstances anymore. We were 2 women sitting across from each other with every opportunity to walk away, and for the first time, we were both choosing to stay. A year later, I stood at the same mountain resort watching Claire carry a cardboard box filled with wildflower centerpieces through the lobby. You know we have employees for this, I said. I have been informed that helping is good for my character. Your therapist again? You, actually. I laughed as she set the box beside me. 12 months had changed more than our relationship. Whitmore Hospitality had stabilized, the 6 threatened hotels were still operating, and Claire had created an employee advisory council that gave workers a stronger voice in company decisions. She still worked hard, still loved schedules, and still had the unnerving ability to remember exactly how everyone took their coffee. But she had learned that leadership did not require carrying every burden alone. I had changed too. My planning company had grown enough for me to hire 2 additional coordinators, and I had refused Claire's offer to invest in it. She had looked offended for approximately 7 seconds before telling me she was proud of me. That was us now. 2 separate lives choosing to meet in the middle. We were back at the resort for the first event funded by a program we had created together. For couples who could not afford traditional weddings were receiving ceremonies without charge, supported by local vendors and the Whitmore Foundation. Claire had wanted to call it something impressive. I had insisted that nobody needed another foundation program with a 12-word name. We compromised. Mostly. By sunset, the final couple exchanged vows beneath the mountain sky. I watched an elementary school librarian promise forever to the woman she had loved for 11 years, surrounded by family, handmade flowers, and folding chairs that cost less than one place setting from Claire's abandoned wedding. Claire stood beside me. You were right, she whispered. About what? An expensive wedding can still be empty. I looked at the laughing families around us. And a simple one can be full. Her hand found mine. Later, after the guests had left, We walked upstairs to check the rooms reserved for volunteers. Claire stopped outside a familiar door. You did this intentionally. I have no idea what you mean. She opened the door. The same sofa sat beside the same window, and beyond the glass, snow drifted quietly over the mountains. Claire looked toward the bed, then at me. One room? Apparently. And one bed? It seems your ownership still does not create additional furniture. She laughed, remembering the storm that had started everything. Then her expression softened. I used to think that night changed my life. It did not? No. You did not change my life, Hannah. You showed me that I was allowed to change it myself. I felt tears gather in my eyes. That might be the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me. I have been practicing emotional maturity. Very impressive. Claire reached for my hand. Do you remember telling me that love meant choosing the same future? I remember. I finally understand what you meant. I looked at her, at this woman who once believed duty required surrender and who had learned that responsibility could coexist with freedom. So do I. Claire smiled. Then what do we choose? I squeezed her hand. 2 lives. 2 careers. 2 opinions about almost everything. Especially centerpieces. Especially centerpieces. We laughed, and then I looked through the window as dawn slowly began coloring the distant peaks. A year earlier, I had driven away from this mountain before sunrise because loving Claire meant refusing to choose for her. Now I understood the other half of that lesson. Healthy love was not about needing someone to complete your life. It was about building a life that already belonged to you and freely inviting someone to walk beside you. Claire leaned her head gently against mine. And your choice? She asked. I held her hand as the first sunlight reached the snow. You, I said. But only because I never had to.